The radio had been dead for 9 days before it spoke my name. Not literally. It didn't say Marcus Hale. But when the static finally broke at 3:47 in the morning, and a woman's voice came through the kitchen speaker with the cadence of someone reading her own obituary, I understood that the message was meant for whoever was still listening. Whoever was still stupid enough to be alone. That narrowed the audience considerably. I think, in the end, it narrowed it to me. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of instant coffee and the .38 my father had left me, field stripped across a dish towel, because cleaning it gave my hands something to do that wasn't shaking. The apartment smelled like old bread and the chemical sweetness of the bleach I'd been using to scrub the door handles. Pointless ritual. The infected didn't ring doorbells. This is the final emergency broadcast from the Northeast Regional Coordination Authority, the woman said. Her voice had the flatness of someone who'd stopped believing in her own words about a week before she'd been asked to read them. All previously designated safe zones are no longer operational. Repeat, all previously designated safe zones are no longer operational. I set the cleaning rod down. Survivors in the metro corridor are advised to shelter in place. Do not repeat. Do not attempt to reach municipal evacuation points. Do not approach military checkpoints. Do not signal aircraft. A pause. Long enough that I thought she'd finished. Long enough that I leaned forward because something about the silence was different than the silence before. One location remains coordinated. Personnel and supplies have been consolidated at the following address: 842 Lindenmere Road, Hartsfield Township. 842 Lindenmere Road, Hartsfield Township. Broadcast ends. Then the static came back, and it didn't leave. I sat there for a long time. I sat there until the coffee was the temperature of the room, and the room was the temperature of the dead air outside. And I understood 3 things in the order they arrived. The first thing was that Hartsfield was 41 miles west of my apartment. And I had not driven a car since the second week, when I'd watched a man named Devin from 3B try to leave in his Civic and make it exactly to the end of our block. The second thing was that the broadcast had not said come. It had said one location remains coordinated. There is a difference between an invitation and a coordinate. A coordinate is just a fact that exists whether you act on it or not. The third thing was that I was going to go. I knew it the way you know you've already lost an argument with yourself. The way my sister Elena used to know our mother had decided something before our mother knew it herself. Elena. I hadn't let myself think her name in 5 days, because thinking it cost something I couldn't afford to spend yet. She had lived lives. I don't know the tense anymore in Seattle, which was a country I would never see again. The address on Lindenmere Road was not Elena, but it was somewhere, and somewhere was the first thing anyone had offered me since the lights went out. I put the .38 back together. The slide clicked home with the small, final sound of a decision being made by someone else and handed to me already wrapped. Outside the window, in the long blue dark before dawn, something moved at the mouth of the alley. 2 shapes, walking the slow, uneven walk that wasn't walking anymore. One of them stopped, turned its face up toward my building, and stood there with the patience of weather. I closed the curtain. My hand was steady. That, more than anything, told me I had already left. By first light, I had everything I owned that mattered laid out on the bed in the spare room, which was not a spare room so much as the room my ex-girlfriend Hannah had used as an office before she'd gone home to Vermont in March, and stayed there for reasons neither of us had been brave enough to call by their name. The desk was still hers. The chair was still hers. The dust on both was mine. I made an inventory because inventories were the only prayers I still believed in. 2 liters of water, 4 cans of black beans, 1 of peaches, 1 of something called vegetable medley that I had bought during a sale in a previous life, a coil of paracord, a flashlight with batteries that were probably half dead, and a second flashlight whose batteries I had stolen from a smoke detector on day 6. The .38 with 11 rounds, which was every round in the apartment and 4 fewer than I'd started with, because I had practiced once in the bathtub with a pillow over the cylinder and learned that I was a worse shot than I'd believed, and that the neighbors, if there were neighbors, did not come to investigate gunfire anymore. A folding knife, a roll of duct tape, a pair of running shoes I had not run in, and the map. The map was the thing. I had bought it 2 years ago at a gas station outside Scranton on a trip I no longer remembered the purpose of. And I had thrown it in a drawer and forgotten it until day 3 of the quiet, when I'd torn the apartment apart, looking for anything that would tell me where I was in a way the phone couldn't. Paper doesn't need a tower. Paper doesn't lie about coverage. I spread it on the desk and traced Lindenmere Road with the tip of the folding knife because my finger was trembling and the knife wasn't. 41 miles if I went the way the highway went. The highway was not an option. I had watched from my window on day 4 the long, unmoving line of cars on the elevated stretch of I-78 visible between the 2 buildings across the street. And I had watched, on day 5, what moved between those cars. And I had not looked at the highway since. The back way was 63 miles, through 3 small towns whose names I knew only as exits I had never taken. Then across the river at a place called Bell's Ford. Then up into the kind of country where the roads stopped being numbered and started being named after the families who had owned the farms before the families stopped owning anything. 63 miles. On foot, with the weight I could carry, in the company I would be keeping. I gave myself 4 days. I gave myself 5 if I was lucky. I did not give myself 6, because I had decided somewhere in the last hour that 6 was the number at which the question became academic. I packed the bag. When I was done, I stood in the doorway of the apartment and looked at the rooms I had not left in 9 days, the way you look at a body at a funeral. Which is to say, I looked at them and felt nothing, and was ashamed of feeling nothing, and then felt that instead. There was a photograph on the refrigerator. Me and Elena at her wedding in 2019. Elena laughing with her head tipped back, my arm around her shoulder, both of us a little drunk and a lot younger. I took it down. I did not put it in the bag. I put it in the inside pocket of my jacket, against my chest, where it would be ruined by sweat within the hour, and where I needed it to be anyway. I unlocked the door. The hallway was empty. The hallway had been empty for 9 days. But standing in it, with the bag on my shoulder and the .38 in my waistband, and the dead air of the building pressing against my face like a hand, I understood for the first time that empty was not the same as safe. It had never been the same as safe. I just hadn't been paying attention. The stairwell was where I met Iris. I had made it down 3 flights without sound and without incident, and I was congratulating myself in the small, private way that gets people killed, when the door to the 2nd floor landing opened below me, and a woman stepped out with a child's backpack in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other and said very quietly, "Don't." I didn't. We stood on the half-stair between landings and looked at each other for what was probably 4 seconds and felt like a negotiation. She was maybe 50. Gray, streaked-through hair she'd cut herself, badly sometime recently. A canvas jacket 2 sizes too big. The knife was held the way someone holds a knife when they have decided to use it but would prefer not to. I knew the grip because mine was the same. "You live here?" she said. "4th floor." "I've never seen you." "I've never seen you either." She processed this. Her eyes went to the bag on my shoulder, the bulk of the jacket where the .38 was, the laces of the running shoes I had double knotted in the hallway, because I had read somewhere, in the time before, that you should double knot your laces in an emergency. She processed all of it in the calm, efficient way of someone who had been processing things like this for longer than I had. "You're leaving," she said. "Yes." "You heard the broadcast?" "Yes." She nodded once, as though confirming something she'd already decided about me. And then she said, "I'm coming with you." It was not a question. It was barely even a statement. It was the sound of a door closing on her side of the conversation. And I understood that whatever I said next would be the first thing I'd said in 9 days that mattered. "I don't know you," I said. "You don't have to know me. You have to know that I have a working car 2 blocks east in a garage nobody's looked in. And you don't. And the highway is not an option. And neither is walking 60 miles by yourself. And if you say no to me right now, you'll be dead by Tuesday." I looked at her. "It's Friday," I said. "I know what day it is." I almost laughed. I didn't, because laughter would have been a sound, and we did not make sounds in the stairwell. But the impulse was there. And the impulse was the first warm thing that had moved in my chest since the broadcast ended. "Marcus," I said. "Iris." "Iris what?" "Iris is enough." It was. I understood that it was. Last names were a currency from the old economy, and we had moved to a new one. And in the new one, you were what you said you were until you proved otherwise. And proving otherwise took time we didn't have. She gestured down the stairs with the knife, not at me, just toward the door, and we went. The lobby was worse than I had let myself imagine. The glass of the front doors was intact, but smeared brown along the inside, as though someone had pressed against it for a long time before giving up or being taken away. The mailboxes hung open. A child's scooter lay on its side near the elevator, which was a detail I made myself not think about, because there were details you could afford to think about and details you couldn't. And Iris was watching me to see which kind of man I was going to be. I was going to be the kind who didn't think about the scooter. "Side door," she said. "Through the laundry." I followed her. In the laundry room, beneath the hum of nothing where the machines used to hum, she stopped with her hand on the back door and looked at me over her shoulder. And her face in the gray light was the face of a woman who had buried something recently and was carrying the shovel. "Whatever's out there," she said, "we don't stop, we don't help, we don't look. Agreed?" "Agreed." She opened the door. The morning came in like a held breath finally let out. And the world on the other side of it was not the world I remembered. And we stepped into it together. The car was a 2003 Honda Accord, the color of an old bruise, and it started on the second turn of the key, which Iris told me later was the only miracle she had used up that month, and she was glad she'd spent it on this. The garage was a private one, beneath a brownstone whose owners she did not explain, and I did not ask. And we backed out of it into an alley that smelled of standing water and something sweeter that I made myself not name. Iris drove. I did not argue. She drove the way a person drives who has been planning the route for longer than they have admitted to themselves. And within 4 blocks, I understood that the working car had not been a piece of luck she had stumbled into in the stairwell. It had been a plan. I had been the variable she added at the last moment, and I was not sure yet whether she had added me because she needed help or because she needed a witness. "How long have you been ready to leave?" I asked. 6 days. What were you waiting for? She didn't answer for a long block. We passed a city bus that had come to rest against a street lamp at an angle that suggested the driver had stopped trying to steer some time before the bus had stopped moving. The windows of the bus were dark. I made myself look at the road. My husband, she said finally. He was sick. Not that kind of sick, the other kind. He had a transplant in February and his medication ran out on day 3. I was waiting for him to die, so I wouldn't have to leave him. I didn't say I'm sorry. I'm sorry was another word from the old economy. When did he? I said, and stopped because I didn't know how to finish. Tuesday. That's why you said Tuesday, in the stairwell. Yes. We drove. The city thinned out the way cities do, in stages, each stage a little quieter and a little wronger than the one before. The first stage was the storefronts with the broken windows and the long brown stains on the sidewalks. The second stage was the residential blocks, where the curtains were drawn in every window of every house, which I had thought, in the time before, was a sign of life, and which I understood now was a sign of nothing. The third stage was the strip malls, where the parking lots were full of cars that would never move again, and where, in one of the lots, a figure that had once been a woman in a yellow raincoat stood in the exact center of the asphalt, with her face turned up to the sky, swaying very slightly, as though listening to music we couldn't hear. Iris did not slow down. She did not speed up. She drove the way you walk past a dog you are not sure is chained. "Have you killed one?" she asked. The question came out of nowhere and was not from nowhere. I understood that we had been driving toward it since the laundry room. "No," I said. "Have you seen one up close?" "From a window, across the street." She nodded. "You'll have to, before we get there. I'd rather it be on a day we choose." "Have you?" "Twice." She did not elaborate, and I did not ask, because the way she said twice was the way a person says a word they have made small in order to carry it. We reached the edge of the city in the late morning. The bridge over the river at Bell's Ford was 4 hours south, and the back roads between here and there were going to be the question I had not yet let myself ask, which was the question of what we would do when the car ran out of road or fuel or luck, and which of those 3 would come first. The gas gauge read 3/4 full. Iris saw me look at it. "There's a can in the trunk," she said. 5 gallons. After that, we walk." "After that, we walk," I repeated. And the words felt like a contract being signed in a language I was still learning. We hit the first real trouble outside a town called Meriton, which was not on the map I had bought in Scranton, because the map I had bought in Scranton was 8 years old, and Meriton, according to the green sign at the town line, had been incorporated in 2019. The sign was the only thing about Meriton that looked new. Everything else looked like it had been new once, briefly, and had been waiting since then for someone to come back and finish the job. The road into town narrowed to a single lane between 2 long fields of corn that had grown past harvest and gone brown and broken in the wind. And we came around a slow curve, and Iris hit the brakes hard enough that the seatbelt locked across my chest, and the bag at my feet slid forward into my shins. There was a truck across the road. Not a truck that had crashed. A truck that had been parked across the road, perpendicular to the lanes, with its hood up and its driver's side door open, and a length of chain stretched from its bumper to a fence post on the far side of the ditch. A roadblock made by hands, made deliberately. "Back up," I said. "I see it. Back up now." She was already in reverse. The Honda whined and the back tires bit gravel, and we were moving. And we made it maybe 15 feet before I saw the second truck come out of the corn behind us and stop across the road we had just driven down. Iris said a word I will not repeat here, very quietly, the way a person says a word in a church. 3 men came out of the corn on the driver's side, 2 on the passenger side. They walked the way people walk who have done this before. They had rifles, not pointed at us, held at the low ready, which is the position a person holds a rifle in when they want you to understand both that they have one and that they have not decided yet whether to use it. The man in front held up an open hand. He was maybe 40, sunburned across the nose, wearing a hunter's orange vest over a flannel shirt. He came around to the driver's window and gestured for Iris to lower it. She lowered it 2 inches. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Iris said. "You folks heading through?" "Trying to." "Where to?" Iris did not answer. I watched her hands on the wheel. They were not shaking. They were not steady, either. They were the hands of a person calculating which version of the truth costs the least. "West," she said. "Past the river." "Past the river is a long way." "I'm aware." The man looked past her, at me. His eyes went over me the way a man's eyes go over a thing he is pricing. "You got fuel?" "Enough." "You got food?" "Some." "You got weapons?" A pause. Iris met his eyes. "One." The man nodded, as though this confirmed something. He stepped back from the window and looked at the men behind him and looked back at her. And I saw I understood in the back of my throat, in the soft, cold place where understanding lives before it becomes words, that this was the moment. This was the moment the road forked, and we did not get to choose the fork. "Here's the situation," he said. "We don't let folks through without a tax. Tax is half of what you got. You pick the half. We're not unreasonable. We're not robbers. We have people. We have kids. The road costs." "And if we say no," Iris said, "then you turn around. And if we can't turn around?" He smiled. It was not a cruel smile. It was a tired smile, which was worse. "You can turn around," he said. "The truck behind you will move. We're not in the business of killing people who don't need killing. We're in the business of the road." Iris looked at me. I looked at the man. I looked at the field of corn behind him, and at the wind moving through it, and at the place where the wind was not moving through it. Because something in the corn was not the corn, and was moving the wrong way, and was getting closer. "Iris," I said very quietly, "the field." She did not turn her head. She had already seen. "Sir?" she said to the man in the orange vest, with a calm I would remember for the rest of my life. "You have about 90 seconds. He turned to look. They all turned to look. There were 6 of them coming out of the corn, not running. The infected didn't run, not really, not the ones we'd seen so far. They came at the speed of something that had no reason to hurry, because hurrying was a thing the living did when they were afraid of being late, and the dead were never late. They were always exactly on time, 6 of them, and behind the 6, more shapes moving in the brown stalks, and behind those, the suggestion of more, and the wind in the corn was not the wind anymore. The man in the orange vest said something I didn't hear, and the men with the rifles brought their rifles up. And Iris put the Honda in drive and floored it. She drove straight at the truck. I want to be clear about this, because I've thought about it a great many times since, and the thinking has not made it simpler. She did not drive at the men. She drove at the truck, at the chain, at the place where the chain met the bumper, where she had seen, in the long, calm second of looking, that the chain was wrapped and not bolted, and that a Honda Accord at 30 miles an hour might be enough to drag a fence post out of soft autumn ground. It was. The post came up out of the dirt with a sound like a tooth being pulled, and the chain whipped sideways, and the truck rocked on its springs, and we went past it on the shoulder, with the passenger side tires in the ditch, and the corn whipping the window beside my face. And behind us, I heard the first rifle go off, and then the second. And then I understood from the sound of the third that they were not shooting at us anymore. I looked back once. I shouldn't have. I'm telling you because I want to be honest, not because the looking was useful. The man in the orange vest was on the ground. One of the others was helping him up. The infected had reached the road. The men were firing into the corn. I could not tell, from the back window of a car going 50 miles an hour on a bad road, whether they were going to make it. I turned around. "Don't," Iris said. I wasn't going to. "Yes, you were." I had been. She was right. I had been about to ask her to stop, or to go back, or to do something with the car that would have made me feel, for the rest of the drive, that I was the kind of man who did something. She knew that, because she had probably wanted to ask the same thing of herself. They were going to take half of what we had, she said. Not to me, to herself, to the windshield, to whatever she was negotiating with on the inside of her own head. They were going to take half, and we were going to have nothing, and we were going to die 15 miles from here in a ditch we didn't choose. I know. They had kids. He said they had kids. He said a lot of things. She drove. The road climbed. The corn thinned and became woods, and the woods became the kind of woods that go on for a long time without offering an exit. And we drove into them, and the light got greener, and the green got darker. And after a while, Iris said in a voice I had not heard her use yet. "That was the second one." "The second what?" "The second time. I told you I'd done it twice. That was the second. You didn't do anything. You drove. I drove, and they died." I did not say anything to that, because there was nothing to say to it that would be true. We drove for another hour. We did not speak. Outside the windows, the woods kept being woods. And somewhere ahead of us was a bridge called Bell's Ford. And somewhere past the bridge was a road named for a family. And somewhere on that road was a house with a number on it. And the number was 842. And the number meant either everything or nothing. And we would not know which until we got there. And we were not going to stop until we did. We came down to the river an hour before dusk, and the river was wrong. I don't know how else to say it. I had grown up not far from water, and water has a vocabulary, the way it moves, the sounds it makes against stone, the smell it carries up from itself in the late afternoon. And the vocabulary of this river was a language I didn't speak. It was too quiet. It moved, but it moved without conversation. The reeds on the near bank stood in the water without bending. There were no birds. Bell's Ford was a single-lane truss bridge, painted green a long time ago and rust now, and it crossed the river at a place where the banks were low and the road dipped down to meet the water on either side. Iris stopped the car a quarter-mile back, at the top of the last rise, and we sat with the engine off and looked. On the bridge, near the far end, a school bus had stopped, not crashed, stopped. It sat with its nose pointed west and its emergency lights still on, very faintly, blinking the slow blink of a battery on its last legs. The windows of the bus were dark. The door was open. "How long do you think it's been there?" I said. "A week, maybe 2. And the lights are still on. Diesel batteries last longer than you'd think." We watched the bus for 10 minutes. Nothing moved on it. Nothing moved around it. The blink of the emergency lights went on, slow slow, slow. We could go around, I said. There isn't an around. Not for 40 miles. The next bridge south washed out in 22. The next one north is in a town we don't want to be in. How do you know that? She didn't look at me. I used to drive a freight route before. It was the most she had said about herself without being asked, and I understood it was a gift, and I did not press for more. We sat for another minute. The light was going. The woods on the far side of the river were already in shadow. We go fast, she said. We don't stop. If the bus is blocking the lane, I'll push it. The Honda won't like it, but it'll do it. And if there's something on the bus, then we go faster. She started the engine. The engine sounded loud, in a way it hadn't sounded loud all day. We rolled down the rise toward the bridge, and the boards of the bridge made a low hum under the tires when we hit them. And the hum went out across the water and came back. And I thought, this is the loudest thing that has happened in this place in a long time. We were halfway across when the bus door moved. Not opened, it was already open. Moved. The way a door moves when something inside it shifts. A figure stepped down onto the bridge. Just one. A child, or what had been a child. Maybe 10 years old. Still wearing a backpack. The straps of the backpack were the wrong color from what they had been, and the child was very thin. And the child turned its head toward us with the slow underwater turn that I had learned in the parking lot of the strip mall was the worst movement a human shape could make. Iris did not stop. Don't look, she said. I looked. I am ashamed of it. I looked because the part of me that was still from before was screaming that it was a child, and the part of me that was from after knew it wasn't. And the two parts of me were having an argument I had not given them permission to have. And in the middle of the argument, Iris hit the brake. Hard, not for the child, behind the child, coming down the bus steps, one after another, slow and patient and many. More of them. 5, 8. I lost count at 11 because counting was not the right response to what I was seeing. The bus had been full. The bus had been full, and they had been on it for a long time, and the door had been open, and we had driven onto the bridge. Back up, I said. I'm backing up. She was. The Honda whined into reverse. The boards of the bridge hummed again. The wrong direction now. The figures on the bridge, I will not call them children, even though some of them were the size of children, because the word does not belong to them anymore, began to move toward us with the unhurried certainty of water finding low ground. Iris. I see them. Iris, the bridge. Because behind us, at the near end of the bridge where we had just come from, more shapes were stepping out of the reeds. They had been waiting. I understood, with a clarity that arrived all at once and stay, that the bus had not stopped on the bridge by accident, and the figures in the reeds had not arrived by accident, and the river was quiet because the river had been quiet for a long time, and we were not the first car to come down this rise toward this bridge in the long blue hour before dusk. We were just the latest. Iris stopped the car. I will tell you what she did, because what she did saved my life. And I owe her the telling. She put the Honda in park in the middle of the bridge. She reached across me and opened the glove box and took out a road flare, which I had not known was there. And she handed it to me, and she said, "When I say go, you light this and you throw it as far back the way we came as you can. Then you run forward. You don't stop at the bus. You run past the bus. You run until the trees. You wait in the trees. What are you going to do?" I'm going to drive the car off the bridge." I stared at her. "There's a gap on the upstream side," she said. "Just past the bus. The guardrail is gone. I saw it when we came down the rise. The water is deep there. I can swim. So can you." "Iris, the car is going to be louder than us. It's going to be moving, and it's going to be on fire. Because I'm going to make it on fire. And they're going to follow it. All of them. They follow movement, and they follow noise, and the car is going to be both. You're going to be neither." "Iris, no. I'm not asking." She wasn't. She had already taken her hand off mine. She had already turned her face forward. She had already become a person I was going to have to remember instead of a person I was going to be with. "Why?" I said. It was a stupid word. It was the only word I had. "Because I drove a freight truck for 16 years, and I'm very good at driving things off of bridges into rivers, Marcus. And you are not. And one of us has to do it. And I'm tired, and you are not. That's not a reason. It's the reason I have." The figures from the bus were 30 yards away. The figures from the reeds were closer. "Marcus," she said, "look at me." I looked at her. Her face in the last of the light was the face of a woman who had decided this in the stairwell, maybe. Or in the laundry room. Or 6 days ago, on Tuesday, when she stopped waiting. I don't know when. I have thought about it. I will keep thinking about it. She had decided it before she met me, is what I think. She had decided it when she put the gas can in the trunk and the flare in the glove box and the kitchen knife in her hand. I was not the reason. I was just the witness she had been waiting for. "Tell someone I was here," she said. "Iris, tell someone, that's all. That's the whole thing, the address. When you get there, you tell them my name. Iris Caldwell. You tell them I drove you to the river." "Caldwell. Caldwell. Now go. Light the flare. Go!" I lit the flare. I will tell you that my hands were not steady. I will tell you that I was crying, which is a thing I had not done in 9 days and had thought I had lost the capacity for. And the crying did not feel like crying. It felt like a thing leaking out of a container that had cracked. I threw the flare. It bounced once on the boards and rolled and came to rest near the foot of the bridge, hissing pink-white into the dusk. The figures in the reeds turned toward the light. I opened the door and I ran. Behind me, I heard the Honda's engine climb. I heard the tires bark on the boards. I heard the impact when she hit the bus, not hard, just enough to push it, and I heard the long scrape of metal on metal as the bus slid sideways toward the gap in the guardrail. I heard her keep going. I did not turn around. I made it to the trees on the far side, and I went into them. And I crouched behind a fallen log, and I put my hands over my mouth, because the sound I was making was not a sound I could afford to make. And I watched between the slats of the bark as the Honda went past the bus and through the gap in the rail and into the river. It did not catch fire. I don't know why she said it would. Maybe she had hoped. Maybe she had been telling me a story so I would do what she needed me to do. The car went into the water nose first, and the water took it without ceremony, and the river finally made a sound, a single low gulp. And then it was quiet again. The figures on the bridge went to the rail. All of them. Every single one. They stood at the rail, and they looked down at the place where the car had gone in. And they stayed there, because there had been movement, and now there was none. And they were waiting for it to come back. I waited too. I waited until full dark. I waited until the flare burned out. I waited until I was sure she was not going to climb up onto the bank downstream the way I kept telling myself she might. She did not. I stood up in the dark and I turned west and I started to walk. I walked for 2 days. I am compressing this because the walking itself was not the story. The walking was the space between stories. I will tell you what mattered. I slept the first night in a culvert under a county road, with the bag under my head and the .38 in my hand, and the photograph of Elena pressed flat against my chest inside the jacket. And I did not sleep so much as stop being awake for short intervals. And in those intervals, I dreamed of Iris driving, and of my sister laughing at her wedding, and of the child on the bus turning its head. And the 3 dreams kept braiding into one dream. And the one dream was that I was the one who had been left at the rail of the bridge, looking down at the water, waiting for movement to come back. I woke before dawn, and I walked. The second day I found a farmhouse. The door was open. I did not go in. I have thought about this since, and I think the reason I did not go in was not caution. I think it was that I had used up something in me at the bridge, and I did not have enough of it left to spend on a farmhouse. I drank from the spigot on the side of the barn. I filled my bottles. I kept walking. In the middle of the afternoon, I met a dog. I want to tell you about the dog, because the dog matters. And because if I do not tell you about the dog, I will be lying by omission about what kind of journey this was. The dog was a brown and white mutt, maybe 30 pounds, with a collar that had no tag, and ribs that showed, and eyes that had not yet decided what kind of animal it was going to be from now on. It came out of a hedgerow about a quarter mile after I crossed a road called Tully Lane, and it sat down in the middle of the road and looked at me. I stopped. It did not growl. It did not wag. It just sat, the way a dog sits when it has been waiting. I gave it a piece of the dried meat from the bag. It took the meat very gently, the way a dog takes food from a hand it has decided to trust. And it ate the meat, and then it stood up and started walking west with me, 3 paces behind my left heel, the way a dog walks when it is chosen. I did not name it. I would not let myself name it. Naming was from the old economy, and I had spent enough of the old currency on Iris, and I would not spend more of it on something with 4 legs that might be dead by morning. But the dog walked with me, and the walking was easier. And that night, when I stopped in the lee of an overturned hay wagon and ate cold beans from the can, the dog sat across from me and watched. And when I lay down, it lay down too. And I slept for the first time in 9 days, the sleep of a person who is not entirely alone. In the morning, the dog was still there. I had half expected it not to be. I gave it water from my hand. It drank. We walked. On the 3rd day from the bridge, in the late morning, I came to a hill that looked west across a long, shallow valley. And at the bottom of the valley, there was a road. And the road was named. And the name was on a wooden sign that had been hand-lettered and nailed to a post sometime recently. And the name was Lindenmere. I sat down on the hill. I sat for a long time. The dog sat beside me. Below us, the road ran along the floor of the valley between 2 long stands of pine, and at the far end of the road, maybe a mile away, I could see the roof of a house. Just the roof. The rest of the house was hidden by the trees. I did not know what was in the house. I did not know if 842 was the house I could see or if it was further on. I did not know if the broadcast had been true. I did not know if the people who had been at the address when the broadcast was made were still at the address now, or if they had been the kind of people who would let me in if they were. or if Iris's name would mean anything to anyone there, or if my own name would. I did not know any of it. But I had walked 63 miles, and I'd been given a car and a flare and a bridge by a woman whose last name I had learned only in time to remember it. And I had a dog that had chosen me on a road called Tully Lane, and the address was a mile away down a hill, and the sun was high, and I was alive. I stood up. The dog stood up. We walked down the hill. The house was a farmhouse. That was the first thing. Not a compound, not a fortress, not a government building with antennas on the roof, and chain link around the perimeter, and the kind of lighting you see on the loading docks of buildings that don't have names. A farmhouse. White clapboard, 2 stories, a wraparound porch sagging on the east side, a red barn behind it that had been red a long time ago and was now the color of dried blood, which was a comparison I made and then made myself unmake. There was a fence. Not a wall. A fence split rail, the kind that keeps cattle from wandering into the road, but reinforced. Someone had run wire through the rails. Someone had set posts every 6 feet between the original posts. Someone had been very patient and very careful, and had done it without making it look like what it was, which was the work of people who did not want anyone driving past to know they were the people they were. I stopped at the end of the driveway. The number on the mailbox was 842. The dog stood at my left heel and looked up the driveway with the still attentiveness of a dog that has understood something is being decided. I put my hand on its head, briefly, and the dog allowed it. And I took my hand back. I walked up the driveway with my hands visible. I want to be specific about this, because the choice mattered. I did not call out. I did not announce myself. I had decided, on the hill, that I was going to walk up to the porch with my hands open and my pack on the ground at the foot of the steps and the .38 still in the bag, not on my person. Because if there were people inside this house who had heard the broadcast and who had been waiting for whoever the broadcast was for, I wanted to give them the first move. I wanted them to know that the first move was theirs to make and that I was not going to take it from them. I made it halfway up the drive before the front door opened. A man came out onto the porch. He was older than me, 60s maybe, white hair cut short, a blue work shirt. He did not have a rifle. He had a pistol on his hip in a holster that looked like it had lived there for a long time before any of this, and his hand was not on it. He watched me come. When I was at the foot of the steps, I stopped and I put the bag down, and I stood with my hands at my sides where he could see them. "Marcus Hale," I said. "I came from the broadcast." He did not answer for a long moment. He looked at me, and then he looked at the dog, and then he looked back up the driveway behind me, as though confirming that I had come alone, and then he looked at me again. "There were supposed to be 3 of you," he said. I did not know what to do with that. I had not expected it. The broadcast had not said 3. The broadcast had not said any number. "I'm one," I said. "Who were the others?" I don't know what you mean." He studied me. His face was not unkind. It was the face of a man who had been disappointed often enough to no longer treat disappointment as an event. "The broadcast went out 3 times, he said. "Once on the 8th day, once on the 11th, once on the 15th. Each time, 3 people responded by the radio relay. Yours didn't. We had 3 sets of coordinates from people who said they were coming. 2 of them stopped checking in 5 days ago. 1 stopped yesterday. I didn't have a radio." I gathered. "There was a woman," I said. The word came out wrong. I made myself continue. "Iris Caldwell. She drove me from the city. She didn't make the bridge. The man on the porch closed his eyes for the briefest moment. Not in grief, not exactly. In something more like the small, tired acknowledgement of a name added to a list he had been keeping in his head for longer than I had been on the road. Caldwell, he repeated. Yes. She drove a truck. Yes. He nodded. He opened his eyes. Come up onto the porch, Mr. Hale, he said. Bring the dog. There are some things we need to talk about, and we should not talk about them in the driveway. I picked up the bag. I walked up the steps. The dog came with me. His name was Dr. Henrik Voss, and he had not been a doctor of medicine. He had been a doctor of veterinary epidemiology at the State University, which he told me as he poured me a cup of coffee from a percolator on a wood stove in the kitchen, and which I understood was a credential he was offering me, the way a person offers a credential to someone they are about to ask to believe something difficult. There were 4 other people in the house. A woman named Constance, who was Henrik's wife, and who had been a nurse, and who looked at the dog the way a person looks at a thing they are going to feed before they feed themselves. A man named Theo, in his 30s, with a stutter that came and went and a quiet competence with his hands that I would learn the shape of over the next few days. A girl named Pia, 16, who Theo had brought out of a town called Ashfork on the 4th day and who had not spoken since, but who, I noticed, watched the dog with the first flicker of something I would have called interest if I had been allowed to call anything that. And a child. A boy, maybe 7. His name was Sam. He was Constance and Henrik's grandson, and his parents had been in Philadelphia, and there were not going to be any further updates from Philadelphia. And Sam had not yet been told this in the words that meant it, although he had probably figured it out in the way children figure out the things adults refuse to put into words. 5 people in a farmhouse, on a road named for a family that did not own the farm anymore. I had walked 63 miles for this. I want to tell you that the disappointment was the first thing I felt. It would be the honest emotional sequence to report. But the disappointment was not the first thing. The first thing was relief. Because they were people, and they were alive. And they had a kitchen with a wood stove and a percolator and a child in it. And the child was eating a piece of toast at the table when I walked in. And I had not seen a child eat a piece of toast in 9 days. And the sight of it cracked something in me that I had been holding closed. The disappointment came second. It came when Henrik sat down across from me at the table and folded his hands and said, Mr. Hale, I need to be honest with you about what this place is. All right. This is not a safe zone. All right. There is no safe zone. The broadcast was accurate in the technical sense. We had been coordinated with the regional authority. We had been the last node still reporting. When the woman on the broadcast said one location remains coordinated, she meant this one. But coordination is not the same as capacity. We are not a shelter. We are not a rescue point. We are 7 adults and a child in a house on a road. And we have food for maybe 6 weeks. And we have a well that works as long as the hand pump holds. And we have a plan that does not extend past the first hard frost. I drank the coffee. It was real coffee. It was the first real coffee I had drunk in 9 days. Then why broadcast? I said. He looked at me. Because we are 7 adults and a child, he said. And 7 adults and a child is not enough. We needed more. We knew we could not feed many more. We knew that whoever came would come with their own assumptions about what we were. We made a choice. The choice was that the cost of having people arrive expecting rescue was lower than the cost of having no one arrive at all. That's a hell of a choice. It is. I have not slept well since we made it. Constance set a bowl of something hot in front of me. stew of a kind. I had not noticed her cooking it. I had not noticed her doing anything. She moved through the kitchen the way a person moves through a room she has been moving through for 40 years. And the dog had followed her without being invited, and was now lying under the table at her feet. "Eat," she said. "We can keep talking after." I ate. Across the table, Sam watched me eat with the unembarrassed attention of a child who has not yet learned that watching strangers eat is impolite, or who has learned it and decided that it does not apply anymore. And I ate the stew and I drank the coffee, and I felt the warmth of it move down into me. And I understood that I was going to have to make a choice of my own, soon, about whether to stay in this house or to keep walking. And I understood also that the choice was not as simple as I had thought it would be when I was on the hill. The broadcast had not been a rescue. It had been an invitation to share the cost. I had come to share it. I just had not known, until I sat at the table, that that was what I had come for. That night, after Sam had been put to bed and Pia had gone up to the room she shared with Constance, and Theo had taken the first watch on the porch with a rifle across his knees, Henrik and I sat in the front room by a kerosene lamp, and he told me the rest. The rest was this. There was a transmitter in the barn. It was an old shortwave rig, military surplus, that Henrik had bought at an auction in 2014 for reasons that had at the time seemed eccentric, and that now seemed providential, and which he had kept maintained because that was the kind of man he was. It still worked. It still transmitted. It was the transmitter that had sent the broadcast. But the broadcast had not originated with Henrik. The broadcast had originated with a woman named Mira Asante, who had been a radio operator at the Northeast Regional Coordination Authority, and who, on the 14th day, when the authority had ceased to be a thing that existed in any operational sense, had taken her equipment and walked out of the facility and made her way, over the course of 3 days, to this farmhouse, which was the address of her uncle, who was Henrik. She had recorded the broadcast in the barn on the 17th day. She had read the script herself, in the flat voice I remembered from my kitchen, because there was no one else left to read it. And because she had felt, she had told Henrik, that the voice of the authority should be the last thing to die. Even if it was only her reading words, she did not believe anymore. She had transmitted it 3 times. She had died on the 21st day, not from the infected, from an infection of the regular kind. A cut on her hand that had gone septic in the days before she'd gotten to the farmhouse, and which Constance had not been able to stop, and which had taken her quickly and quietly in the upstairs room that Pia now slept in. Henrik told me all of this in a voice that did not rise or fall. She wanted people to come, he said. She knew what we were. She knew what we weren't. She felt, and I did not disagree, although I argued with her about the cost that the people who came would be the people who needed to come. The people who would understand, when they got here, what the offer was. And what is the offer? He looked at me across the lamp. To help us last the winter, he said. To be one more pair of hands. To be one more adult in the house. To give Sam one more person who is alive when he wakes up in the morning. That is the offer. That is the whole offer. There is no rescue. There is no plan past spring. There is a farmhouse, and a well, and a child, and the people who choose to spend the winter in it. I was quiet for a long time. How many came? I said. Before you? Yes. 2. Where are they? One is upstairs. That's Theo. And the other? He looked at the lamp. The other is buried behind the barn, he said. He was bitten on the road. He did not tell us until the second night. By then it was too late for him to leave, and too late for us to ask him to. Constance sat with him. He died in the morning. Theo and I dug the grave. I thought about this. I thought about Iris. I thought about the man in the orange vest in the field outside Meriton, and the boy on the bus on the bridge, and the dog asleep under the kitchen table, and the photograph of Elena pressed against my chest inside the jacket that was now hanging on a peg by the front door. "I'll stay," I said. I did not know I was going to say it until I said it. Henrik nodded. He did not thank me. I understood that thank you was a word from the old economy, and that we were past it, and that what he was offering me instead was the small, grave dignity of being treated like a person who had made an adult decision. "All right," he said. "There are things you need to know. We will go over them tomorrow. Tonight, you sleep. Theo is on watch until 2. I take it from 2 until dawn. Tomorrow, you will learn the rotation. The dog can sleep in the kitchen. Constance has already decided to feed it, which means it is already ours, which is how these things go in this house." "All right." He stood. He picked up the lamp. At the doorway he stopped and he turned back, and he said, "Mr. Hale, the woman on the bridge, Iris Caldwell. You said you would tell someone." "Yes. I am telling you that I am someone. I will remember her name. So will Constance. So will the boy. When he is old enough to ask why he is alive, I will tell him about her. That is the only kind of memorial we have left to offer, and I'm offering it to you." I could not speak for a moment. "Thank you," I said finally. It was the wrong word. It was the only word. He nodded, and he carried the lamp out of the room. And I sat in the dark for a long time before I went upstairs to the bed that someone had made for me without my asking. In the room that had been Mira Asante's. In the house at 842 Lindenmere Road. Where the broadcast had ended, and where, I understood now, it had also begun. I want to tell you about a single week in late October, because if I told you about all of the winter, we would be here until spring, and the point of the telling is not the catalog. We lost the barn that week, not to the infected, to a fire which started in the loft from a lamp Theo had left burning while he checked the transmitter, and which spread faster than any of us understood fire could spread in a building that had been standing dry for 90 years. We got the animals out, 2 goats, 4 chickens, the dog, and we got the transmitter out, which was the thing Henrik went back in for, and which I followed him in for, because by then, he was the closest thing I had to a person whose life I would risk my own to protect. And because I had decided in the kitchen on the first night that I was not going to lose anyone else if there was a choice in the matter, we did not lose anyone. We lost the barn. We stood in the yard at 3 a.m. and watched it burn. And the light from the fire was the brightest light any of us had seen in weeks. And Henrik said quietly beside me, "They will see this for miles." And I understood that what he meant was the living will see this, because the dead did not care about light, but the living did. And the living were the question we had not yet been asked. They came the next day, 3 of them, a man, a woman, and a boy of maybe 12. They came up the driveway the way I had come up it, with their hands open, and they stopped at the foot of the steps, and the man said his name was Owen Carrick, and that they had seen the fire from a ridge 11 miles east, and that they had not eaten in 4 days, and that they would work for food and shelter and would not stay if we told them to leave. Henrik looked at me. It was the first time he had looked at me that way, as though the decision were partly mine, as though by staying through the first month, I had earned a share in the question. I thought about the broadcast. I thought about the script Mira had read. I thought about one location remains coordinated. And I thought about what coordination meant, and what it had cost, and what it would keep costing. "Let them in," I said. Henrik nodded. Constance was already moving toward the kitchen. Pia, who had begun to speak again in the second week, small words, a sentence here and there, mostly to the dog, whom she had named Juno without asking anyone. Pia came down the porch steps and crouched in front of the boy and said, "I'm Pia. What's your name?" And the boy said Eli. And Pia took his hand and led him into the house. And that was how our number went from 6 to 9. I tell you this because of what happened later that week. On the Friday, Owen Carrick took a turn on watch with Theo. And during his watch, a group of the infected came down the road from the east, not many, 6 or 7, and Owen panicked. He fired before Theo told him to, which drew more from the woods. And by the time Henrik and I got out to the porch with rifles, there were 19 of them in the yard. And we spent the rest of the night fighting from the porch and the second-floor windows. And when it was over, there was a smell in the yard that I will not describe. And Owen was sitting on the porch step with his head in his hands, shaking. He had not been bitten. None of us had. We had been very lucky and a little skilled, and the order in which those two factors had contributed had been more luck than skill. Henrik sat down beside Owen on the step. I expected him to be angry. I would have been angry. I had been angry in the windows when I understood what Owen had done. Henrik said, "The first time I shot one, I missed twice and hit a tree. The tree did not forgive me. The dead did not forgive me. My wife did, eventually. You will learn. We have time. We have, at minimum, until the first snow, and probably until spring. And that is a great deal of time in which to learn." Owen looked up at him. I watched from the doorway the small visible moment in which Owen Carrick decided that he was going to live through the winter, and that he was going to be useful, and that he was going to be the kind of man Henrik Voss had just, without saying so, told him he could become. I understood, watching, that this was what Mira Asante had been broadcasting for. Not for rescue, not for survivors, for witnesses to each other's becoming. The first snow came on the 11th of November. I remember the date because Sam asked at breakfast what day it was, and Constance told him, and he said, "That's my mom's birthday," and the kitchen got quiet. And then Constance said, "Then we'll have cake." And she made one out of cornmeal and the last of the sugar, and we ate it at lunch. And Sam was allowed to have 2 pieces. And afterward, he went out onto the porch and stood in the snow without a coat for a full minute before Constance brought him inside, and nobody told him not to. I want to end here, on this day, because this was the day I understood what had happened to me. I went out in the afternoon to bring in firewood from the lean-to we had built where the barn had been. The snow was coming down lightly. Juno walked with me. The yard was quiet in the way the yard had become quiet, not the silence of the first 9 days in my apartment, which had been the silence of something held breath, but the quiet of a place where people lived and worked and made small sounds, and where the small sounds were absorbed by snow and by trees and by the slow turning of a season. I stopped in the middle of the yard. I stood there for a long time. The dog stood with me. The snow gathered on my shoulders and on the back of my neck, and I did not brush it off. I thought about the man I'd been in the kitchen on the morning of the broadcast. He had been a man with 11 rounds and 4 cans of beans and a map he had bought at a gas station. And he had been a man who had not said his sister's name out loud in 5 days. And he had been a man who believed that the address on Lindenmere Road would be either everything or nothing, and that there were no other options. I thought about what he would have made of the man standing in the yard. he would not have recognized him. I had thought, when I left the apartment, that I was going to a destination. I had thought that survival was a journey toward a place that existed, and that the place would either save me or it would not. I had thought that the only question was whether I would arrive. I understood, in the yard, that this had been the wrong question. The place was not the answer. The place was the container. The answer was what we did inside it. The answer was Constance, making a cake out of cornmeal on a child's mother's birthday. The answer was Pia, teaching Eli the names of the birds at the feeder Theo had built from a coffee can. The answer was Owen Carrick on the porch step, learning to be useful. The answer was Henrik remembering Iris Caldwell's name, and saying it sometimes, in the evenings, when he was making lists of the dead and the still living, and not always being certain which list she belonged on. The answer was that we had become a household. Not a rescue, not a fortress, not a safe zone, a household. A small, organized human arrangement in a place where small, organized human arrangements were no longer common, and where the maintenance of one was the work, and the work was the meaning. And the meaning was the answer to the question I had been asking, without knowing it, since the static came back on in my kitchen on the morning of the 9th day. I picked up the firewood. I walked back to the house. At the door, before I went inside, I stopped and I took the photograph of Elena out of the inside pocket of my jacket, where it had lived since the morning I left the apartment, and I looked at it. My sister was still laughing. She would always be laughing. I would not see her again. I had accepted this in stages over the previous month, and the acceptance was not finished and would not be finished for a long time. But it was begun, and the beginning was the thing. I put the photograph back in the pocket. I went inside, where Constance was already calling everyone to the table, and where Sam had saved me a seat next to him because that was the seat I sat in now, and where the lamp was lit against the early evening, and where the household was gathering for the meal that would mark the end of a day in a winter that I was going to live through. Outside, the snow kept falling. It would fall, off and on, until April. We would lose 2 more people before it stopped Owen's wife to a fever in February. And an older man named Rafe, who would arrive in January and stay for 19 days before deciding to walk on west, and who we would never hear from again, and whose name we would also remember. We would gain 3, a woman and her infant in December, a teenager named Cole in March, who would arrive on a bicycle in a storm, and who would become, eventually, Pia's closest friend. We would last the winter. That was the thing. That was the whole thing. We would last it. A man came up the driveway last week. He had walked, he said, from a city I'd not heard of by a route I would not have chosen. And he stopped at the foot of the steps with his hands open. And he said his name was Daniel. And he said he had heard there was a place on Lindenmere Road where people could come. Henrik was not on the porch. Henrik had died in his sleep in February, quietly, the way he had wanted to, and Constance had buried him beside the lean-to with the rest of the names. I was on the porch. I looked down at the man at the foot of the steps, and I saw, for a moment, myself, the man who had stood in that same place a year and 4 months ago with a bag and a dog and a photograph of his sister in his jacket, and who had not known what the offer was. I came down the steps. I told him my name. I told him the offer. I told him there was no rescue, and there was a household, and the household would have him if he would have it, and the cost was shared, and the winter was long, and the work was the meaning. He listened. Then he picked up his bag, and he came up onto the porch, and I held the door for him. and we went inside together. And somewhere behind us, very faintly, I thought I heard the long static of a broadcast finally ending.